Salve! Justin Slocum Bailey here from the Teach Human Latin Teacher Lab, which is a place with resources and training to simplify Latin teachers' lives and help them grow as teachers, and through that, to help Latin learners learn the language joyfully and efficiently. In the last video, we talked about starting to think of our job as people who are helping students acquire the Latin language as teaching Latin sentences, not just words and endings and putting that together, but teaching Latin sentences so that we can expose students to the language a lot, in context and in memorable ways, because that's something on which the research is unanimous, that students need to be exposed to meaningful language in a communicative context, whether written or spoken, a lot, to really internalize the language, have the necessary brain chemistry changes go down that will allow them down the road to read Latin texts joyfully and efficiently and skillfully, accurately. So in this video, we're going to build on that by giving a couple more examples of thinking of teaching Latin language as teaching Latin sentences. We'll use some different types of sentences. We'll talk about some additional question asking techniques, and we'll talk about ways of expanding those sentences, making them a bit more complex. So last time we had the sentence, Anna bene saltare potest. Anna is able to dance well, and we talked about how we can think of each of the parts of that as a slot. Today, let's use a different sentence. This one also, though, would be generated from asking students a question about themselves. That's a really common way that I start class. A lot of times it'll be on the board already. Students walk in, they answer whatever the question is. Usually that's in English, because the whole point is that they don't necessarily know how to say that thing yet in Latin, and I'm using this class to expose that to them especially well. On that note, if you were wondering in the last video, well, why that particular sentence, Anna bene saltare potest? It could be just a way of getting to know students better in Latin, but also maybe my textbook or my curriculum is telling me that now we're at the point where students are supposed to learn infinitives, or they're supposed to learn the construction, the complementary infinitive construction, is able to blank, likes to blank, wants to blank. And so I think about, okay, what's a way that I can expose students to that a lot in a communicative context and in a memorable way? And that's how I would come up with that question and then that sentence, Anna bene saltare potest. So here's a different example. Let's say we generate the sentence, Silvia canem habet. Sylvia has a dog. I could have generated that either by asking students, hey, do you have any pets? And having them answer that question. What's something you have that you like? Do you have a dog? Really specifically, whatever it is. But I ended up with the information, Silvia canem habet. And maybe I've even asked her, either I've asked students to write on their little piece of paper or their whiteboard, if you have a pet, list your pets and how many of each one you have. Most of the information, as you'll see, I'm going to elicit by actually asking students in class, but maybe I want that in advance. Or if I've just heard, okay, Silvia canem habet, I might, before writing the sentence down, and you'll see why, ask, Silvia, unum canem habes, duos canes habes, unum, bene. So I write the sentence down on one line, right? So that I can see the slots better, write English translations better, whatever I may want to do. So, Silvia, unum canem habet. Sylvia has exactly one dog. Silvia unum canem habet. And remember, I can think of these as slots. They can vary, right? Different persons can have a dog. Sylvia could have different numbers of dogs. She could have different animals, or she could do something other than having to the dog, like Silvia unum canem amat. She loves that one dog, for example. Now, I can remember the goal is in a communicative, community-based context. That's what a classroom is learning community, right? In such a context, expose students lots and lots of the language in ways that help it sink in. So I might ask some verification type questions. Verification questions are basically yes or no questions, either or questions, or open-ended questions that are already answered in the sentence that we have, or are already sort of canonical information for the class. It's something we found out. So I ask, Silvia unum canem an duos canes habet. And in that kind of a setting, or with that kind of question, I'm expecting a choral answer of unum or unum canem, something like that. Silvia duos canes habet, or habetne. Silvia duos canes. Does she have two dogs? In that case, I'm answering whatever we're using for no, non minime. I also teach students really early on, non habet would be a very Roman way of answering that question. Non habet. She doesn't have that being two dogs. But that's my ability to ask those questions has been enhanced by thinking of these as slots. I can put other numbers here. I can turn the whole thing into a question, and so on. Now, if you've tried this before, or if you haven't, but you're thinking about trying it, you might think, okay, how interested, Justin, you said have it be a memorable context, give lots of exposure. How long are students going to be patient with kind of this sentence and slight variations on it? The answer is depends on how tight-knit the community is, but I like to bring in some other information and bring in other students fairly quickly both for the sake of having everyone be involved and for the sake of having more interesting and, as you'll see, longer and more complex sentences. So I might ask something like, Omnes Silvia unum canem habet. Quis, that means who, right, as you know, but I usually have a poster or somewhere in the classroom where there's several question words written down, common question words, so I'm asking questions all the time in Latin. So quis duos canes habet. Quis duos canes habet. And I've varied now these two slots. I could ask that question anyway, but thinking of myself as teaching Latin sentences with variable slots helps me with that. So quis duos canes habet. Quis duos canes. And maybe some hands go up. Maybe I keep going. Quis tres canes habet. Tres canes habet. Quattuor, whatever it is. I'll probably stop with the one who has the most because that's going to be the most interesting. So let's say, though, that in this class, the highest anyone has is 2. And we found out, oh, Marcos is a student. Marcos duos canes habet. I can write down that entire sentence if I want. Marcos duos canes habet. Okay, now that sentence isn't really longer, but it does have a different word here and a different form here, which is handy. Now, remember I talked about with the previous video's sentence, Anna bene saltare potest, that sentence format might have been suggested by infinitives being the new topic in the textbook, or simply by wanting to find out some information about students, having them learn a variety of action, verbs, you name it. In this case, maybe it's again, finding out more about students. Maybe my curriculum has me teaching students a lot of words for animals. Maybe it's something as common as accusative, direct objects, you name it. But if you're wondering, okay, where do these sentences come from? Where do the questions come from? That's where they come from. If my curriculum is telling me to teach a certain thing, which means expose them to it a lot in communicative context in memorable ways, as you've heard me say now many times, or maybe I'm looking ahead, thinking ahead to a text that I know we're going to read that has certain words that are key words there or key constructions that I want to expose students to. So that's where this would come from in the first place. So here we have Marcos duos canes habet, but I want to start working with some longer sentences, some complex sentences, whatever type of complexity that is, whether it's just multiple things happening in the sentence, whether it's subordination, you name it. So we've got now Marcos's information. I'm going to start asking him some information about his dogs. Marque, tu duos canes habes. Tu duos canes habes. Ita est? Bene, bene. Canes tui sunt magni an parvi. Sunt magni an parvi. Now, gestures aren't the clearest way to communicate meaning. If those words are new to students, I would write that down as well, because that could mean long and short, or who knows, right? So we want to be clear here, or else all that exposure in communicative context in memorable ways might have students remembering something different than what the word actually means. But let's say the students already know those words. Canes tui sunt magni an parvi. Let's say one of them is big and one of them is small, and he communicates that to me in whatever language. It's okay if he says one's big and one's small. That's going to happen, especially in introductory classes. I can then make sure that that information is converted to Latin and the students hear and see it plenty of times. So maybe he says, maybe it turns out one is big and one's small. Unus est magnus, unus canis est magnus, alter, the other one, est parvus, the other one is small. Now, if I have in mind the language that's coming up in the textbook, in the curriculum, or in a text that we're going to read, I can use that to determine what question I'm going to ask or how I'm going to convey that information. Maybe it's this. Marcos duos canes habet, e quibus, out of which alter est magnus, alter parvus. And that e quibus is quite common as opposed to quorum, of which e quibus when you're talking about numbers of things. That's not the only way. You could say quorum. So Marcos duos canes habet, e quibus alter est magnus, alter parvus. That's a lovely Latin sentence, and a nice Latin word order, nice constructions, and I can write down that entire sentence. Now I've got Marcos duos canes habet. I'm not going to write it down here for time reasons, but I would with my students if that's the thing I was focusing on. E quibus alter est magnus, alter parvus. Now I've already got quite a long sentence. We started just with this sentence, teaching Latin sentences. Remember, we started with just this sentence, but we expanded it. What if I decided that's too long for now, or I want to do something different? That was using a relative pronoun, right? E quibus. What if I wanted to use a different construction, maybe a shorter construction, but still use relative pronouns? Marque, canes, canes tuos amas, amasne, canes tuos. Maybe Marcos is actually annoyed by the dogs. He doesn't really like them, or they're actually, his brother's dogs or something like that, but he has them in his house. Maybe it's quos non amat. I'm gonna go ahead and write it out this part because it's a little shorter. Duos canes habet quos non amat. Quos non amat. Marcus duos canes habet quos non amat, which he doesn't like, he doesn't love. Now it's already become like a little interesting. Okay, if your students are like ones I've had, they maybe don't understand how someone could not like their dog or something like that. That's like the worst crime you can commit in many of my classes is like not liking pets. So Marcus duos canes habet quos non amat. I want to keep involving other students, right? We've involved Sylvia now. We've involved Marcus now some. We've involved in everybody through my asking choral questions. But I don't want to just always stay on the one student. So I'm going to bounce back to Sylvia. I might say, Sylvia. But instead of, this is a little pro tip, instead of like peppering her with a question right away, I'll set up the information that I'm asking about and then ask her, but I'll still say Sylvia first so she knows that she has that sort of prompting that she's going to get called on to answer a question. Sylvia. Marcus duos canes habet. Omnes Marcus canes suos amat? Non amat. Sylvia, Marcus duos canes habet quos non amat. Class, what does the quos mean here? Which, yeah, exactly. Quick little pop-up grammar question. I am teaching those kinds of things to students along the way. Yeah, quos means which. Quos non amat. Sylvia, tu unum canem habes. Amasne canem tu Marcus canes suos non amat. Tu canem tuum amas? Sane, sane, omnes. Marcus duos canes habet quos non amat. Sylvia unum canem habet quem amat. Quem amat. And you notice I went over to the next line here because this board I'm using for the video is short, but I ideally would write this all on one line, and then I could also extend the Sylvia sentence. Sylvia unum canem habet quem amat. And then I can even now ask the pop-up grammar question, hey class, how come it's quem here, unum canem habet quem amat, but quos here? The right answer is because here it's one dog, whom she loves, or which she loves. Here it's two dogs, quos, which or whom doesn't love. Now I've got teaching Latin sentences, but now I've got a pair of sentences. And one of the best ways for calling attention, if you want or need to grammatical forms is in a small, in context, ideally a written context, not written because they're written on the board and everyone can see instead of it just being sound waves floating around that dissipate. A written context where you can contrast different forms of the same word. I love doing that, and I've seen lots of skilled teachers do that well. So class, why is it quem here, quos here? That's right. Here it's one dog whom she loves. Here it's two dogs whom or which he does not love. By the way, you can get that as a choral answer. You can have people volunteer the answer. You can have everyone write down their answer on one of these boards and hold it up so that everyone has equal processing time. If you're teaching online synchronously, you can have people type in a private chat to you their answer so that not everyone sees it. We'll talk in other videos about lots of ways to get the most out of questioning techniques with students. So I'll leave this basically here for now after rattling off a couple more ways that these sentences could vary. So again, we started with Sylvia unum canem habet. That's our basic Latin sentence that we're teaching. Even this sentence is really kind of just a variation on this sentence. Okay, it has this format. It just adds another clause and changes some of the specific details here, but it's this format of sentence, right? The main clause, Sylvia has one dog, is the same basic sentence as Marcus has two dogs, right? So what else could I do? Maybe I ask about other animals. Maybe I find out Sylvia unum canem habet et duas feles. Sylvia unum canem habet et duas feles. Maybe I find out from another student they also have one dog, but they have three cats. Okay, Monica unum canem habet et tres feles. And we contrast that information. So you can already tell, as far as questioning techniques, which is one of the main topics of this video, comparing and contrasting students, and then alternating between asking them individual questions, asking them questions about the other, and asking the entire class questions about either or both or any of the people who have been mentioned. So why would you choose this particular sentence? And why would you choose questions that generate certain additions? Well, either because that's just what you want to do next to get your students to be exposed to the Latin language more in general, or because that's something that your text requires of you, or your department requires of you, or that is advisable for another text, a literary text maybe, or even a textbook story that's going to be coming up soon. So remember, lots of exposure, in context exposure, in memorable ways. And I just want to point out, I didn't have to be really smart or really creative to come up with these examples. I could script out in advance and write on a little note card if I wanted that I'm holding right here exactly what Latin things I'm going to say and what things I'm going to ask. So I don't need to be a super comfortable extempore Latin speaker or think on my feet. This is stuff you can script in advance to expose students to exactly the things that you think they need to be exposed to or that you know they do in order to be successful in the program or with upcoming texts. So keep practicing both thinking about your role as a teacher of the Latin language, as a teacher of Latin sentences. Keep practicing some of the question asking techniques that I've started to show you. In the meantime, explore the other videos on this channel, and if you want there to be more like them, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell, like the video, leave a comment, and of course share with your colleagues and friends. I'll see you next time. Wale.